done a calculation recently of what it would cost your organization if it suffered a data breach. The cost of healthcare data breach reaches 11 million. I mean, for me, that's quite alarming. I know that for many other persons within the industry, talking about the limited budgets that many organizations have to work with as it relates to cybersecurity efforts. And in today's cybersecurity article, uh, review, we look at a very interesting report, which I believe every security practitioner, I mean, persons who are also a part of the executive, I mean, board of management, should actually take time to explore in depth. There is so much, I mean, insights there that can tremendously, I mean, add value to the security efforts within an organization. And we are talking about that 2023 cost of a data breach report, which delivers essential insights to help security and IT teams better manage risk and limit potential losses. And I mean, among the top results in this year's research conducted by Pohlman Institute and analyzed by IBM Security, you will find a number of things as it relates to how breaches are identified, how security, AI, and automation reduce cost and response times, the financial and time impact of involving law enforcement in responding to a ransomware attack. Also, the effects on cost and time of resources, including security, information, and event monitoring. Um, Now we have Paul Robinson and Jonathan Fisher who will be providing us with their expert assessment of this report. I mean, guys, I'm anxious to hear your feedback on this report in terms of its findings, recommendations. That's very important as it relates to the recommendations to help reduce the cost of a data breach, and very importantly, ways that this report can help security efforts in organizations within the various categories that have actually been identified. So, guys, welcome. And I mean, it's always a pleasure to have you to share your insights. And I'm hoping to all the various information that you will be providing in terms of your feedback. So, the mic is yours, guys. I mean,
Great.
Paul, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I could start. So this is a report that comes out annually. It's been coming out for several years now, and I think the first thing I wanted to mention, and then Jonathan, I'm interested in your initial statements, but I want people to get comfortable with that. This data is real data. This is not a guess or a pie in the sky kind of theory around the cost. This is actual real data. I know people that contribute to this report, that do the research on this report, and it's real data. So what you want to do is take the real data, but then take that data and make it actionable to your organization, and really get your organization to understand the cost impacts of a cyber incident, or if it's legally determined a breach. It's important for you to, if you see, like, it said $11 million on average for a healthcare incident. It could be more than that for your organization. So this document, I feel, is set up to where it's starting internal discussions and really doing a cost-based analysis internally based off of these facts and figures to say, okay, what would it really cost us to be down a month with a ransomware attack? Or what would it cost us if we are handling PII and it was leaked? How would that impact us from a state and local perspective, a third party perspective, a customer perspective, and things like that, and go from there. Like you said, Riche, it's a very heavy document, a lot of data that's in there. So my goal is in the next 25 minutes that we're talking is that we could pick out the key highlights for you to consider, and not just read the report and say, oh, the world, is falling apart and the sky is falling. But okay, how does this data apply to our individual organizations that we work at?
Yeah, and to jump on that, everything Paul said was great. This report is a lot. It's a lot of data, but it's like Paul said, it's real data. ways that the executive teams of organizations can look at it, the security teams can look at it. I think some of the things I really like about the report is it gives you good hard numbers, like an average number of how long it will take to identify, how long it will take to contain. Uh, the cost of that has been going up, and where the attack vectors are, and the different sectors. Right, no one's immune to it, but the report really does highlight some of the places that it's really hitting. Another thing I liked about is how it can compare different countries, how much the percentage has either decreased or increased. Unfortunately, the United States, we got to go bold, and I guess it says for the 13th straight year, we've been the top breached nation in the world. So, um, you know, that's not quite a good thing to have, but the reality of knowing that a lot of these cyber attackers, the different countries that they're focusing on, is important to know. So that way, you can plan accordingly in your business, right? And that's not to say if you're in Australia or the UK, that you need to worry about that. I think in some of those reports, it showed that it decreased from last year. You still have to be aware of it, but it's just showing some good hard data of what's been going on around the world as far as security breaches.
It's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, that's also very important, guys, that you have actually mentioned. Um, I mean, there's so much content involved in this report. Very important is the fact that it actually, as Paul had mentioned, this is real live data, real research based on what actually exists within the industry that is actually affecting our various organizations. Now, based on this report, based on what you're actually seeing, based on the statistics, based on the industries that are actually highlighted, being affected the most, what is this actually saying for organizations that actually fall within these categories? Talking about ranging from healthcare going right down to, I mean, the one that is least listed.
Things are getting worse. I mean, I don't know how you can look at this data and think that we're moving the needle in a positive direction. And I know that that's a very negative thing to say, and it's not a light and cheery way of saying it. But the data is the data. I can't argue with data and numbers. I can argue with theory or thought or whatever. But yeah, it's just getting worse. And in the last I'd say several months, it really has been an apathetic attitude towards risk and compliance and cybersecurity that I've seen. And that's a problem. That's a real problem that I think a lot of organizations are saying, well, it's going to happen. What am I going to do? And then I'll just roll the dice and see how I come out from it. And it's just not a good attitude to have, because these are people that haven't experienced a cyber incident or a data breach in their organizations. When you realize that, it's a very, very unpleasant situation to deal with, and the costs are compound too. I think the data that we have here is okay. How much did it cost? It cost us $11 million. Where are you getting the cost from? There are other soft costs that are involved there. One of the things that I don't know if they account for is, more often than not, when an organization experiences an incident like this, employees leave. Cybersecurity people leave. So the cost of rehiring people, retraining people, assimilating someone to an organization, that's a cost there as well. The communications costs, are we including that as well? There's public relation. Public relations is a big thing. When an incident takes place, it could save you millions and millions of dollars with the way that you're disseminating information out from the incident that took place. But that costs a lot of money to get someone that can write something that goes out to the general public, or things like that. So I really think that it's getting worse. And again, having this report as a springboard to deeper conversations is of major importance.
Okay, great. So coming out of this report, we are seeing how breaches are identified. We're seeing the impact of evolving law enforcement. We're seeing the effect of ransomware playbooks and workflows, specific costs associated with regulatory fines. If and how companies plan to increase security investment as a result of a breach. Also, we have the impact of the following mitigation strategies. So, when you actually look at this particular report, can you speak to some of the areas that have actually been identified in terms of those elements or those key areas that we as security practitioners need to be aware of so that we can actually implement the necessary plans or put the necessary controls, your necessary team in place to ensure that we are prepared to deal with these sort of incidents or security breach, sorry, data breach that will actually take place within these organizations. I mean, we are looking at approximately 17, areas that they have actually highlighted.
Yeah, and with that, what I think the report does good is, yeah, it highlights the errors, but then there's also great tools that it's recommending, and different things to kind of improve. And I know each of us are probably taking key things out of this report. One of the big things that I see is, one of the stats that it talks about is the difference between those companies that are able to recognize and resolve it. And they specifically say there's a 200-day mark. The cost difference between that, those who do it are able to find and resolve within 200 days compared to those that take it longer, that there's a 23% cost increase for those that go over 200 days. So the big thing is understanding the different attack vectors, the different vulnerabilities that this report identifies, right? Talking about the ransomware playbooks. One of the biggest things, the attack vector, right? And we've talked about it before. We always say phishing's one of the top ones, social engineering, they are. But according to this report, the actual top one is going to be like compromised or stolen employee credentials, right? So whether that's a malicious insider threat that's doing it, that's selling it off, or just not paying attention to how they're handling their credentials, like that is something that's important. Every employee gets some type of a credential, right? Even if it's just your unique username, password, right? That is a credential that if it is let go, is or misused, that it can be an attack vector that someone can take, right? The next one is the malicious insiders, right? Those are the top two. Then we get into the social engineering and the phishing, right? So those are the big ones. Is how are you taking care of your credentials and treating the employees so that they don't become a malicious insider threat? And then how are you training them to ensure that their credentials are not going to get stolen, is by doing that. And understanding those different attack vectors, and it's nothing new. This is something that's been available. Everyone hears about, and just paying attention, being aware that there are those vectors to get into, and it goes up into the 17 vulnerabilities. But the biggest for me is what the report helps to highlight is, yes, it's scary out there. There's a lot of risk, but they do provide a lot of different tools, right? One of the biggest that I'm seeing is the use of AI automation, that they're saying how it has increased the detection time for these companies, right? It says it can reduce detecting it by 108 days, right? On average, I think the report was saying it's about 277 days before you even realize that you've been breached, right? We're talking almost a whole, well, not a whole year, but at least 3/4 right there. A little bit over, 3/4 of the year that it takes before you actually understand that you've been attacked. Now, if you can reduce that by the use of, AI to 100 days, that's a huge difference in being able to meet that 200 day mark and saving a lot of costs, saving a lot of heartache, a lot of reputational cost, right? Because that's another cost. And how do companies take advantage of this? The biggest thing is supporting your security engineers, your security team in training, right? AI is a new tool. Everyone, we need to get out there. We need to understand how companies can use it ethically and being able to be responsive in supporting their security plans. Because I can guarantee you, the threat actors are using AI. They're learning. I think I even saw that there's a new platform for cyber criminals called Fraud GPT. So that way there is a tool specifically for them and how to use AI. So we, security teams, the executive team leadership needs to be supportive of their employees, their security teams in learning and getting training on the new tools that can provide better security for them.
Very well said. Very well said. Yeah, I would going back to the first point there, the beauty of the report, and you might not pick it up when you're reading it, so I'm glad we're having this discussion and others can learn from it. This is all a business problem. Breach, cyber incident, ransomware attack. This is all business, and the challenge that a lot of businesses have is like, well, this is just a technical problem, so let's just throw tech at it and hope for the best. It's really, when you're talking about whether it's malicious or in error sharing of credentials, that's a business problem. Let's equate it to the physical world. If you had an epidemic of employees handing out physical keys or key cards to random strangers that could access the building and cause damage and harm, that's not a physical security problem. That's a company problem. That is something that the whole business needs to be aware of. So I like how when they point things out, the vulnerabilities that we have, it really doesn't give organizations any choice but to say, okay, we need to look at this holistically from a business perspective. With that, Jonathan, your synopsis on AI was spot on and brilliant. When I first started in cybersecurity, stateful packet inspection firewalls, that was what we used. It was the rage. And then, as 2009 and as we moved into the 2010s, then it was application-based firewalls, being able to dive in deeper into what things are and how things were working, really started to take place. And now AI is now on the bleeding edge of that. And frankly, it's necessary because, as you stated, Jonathan, the criminals are using it. And there are more criminals than more, we'll call us white hat security professionals that are out there. The ratio is staggering in comparing criminals to people that are actually trying to do right in our industry. And AI is really the only way that we can keep up. I mean, to be able to cut that time down in 50%, is not human. Is not humanly possible. So we need that. Now, on the flip of that, I will say, we live in this world of extremes, unfortunately, in all facets of society. I wouldn't say let's 100% go into AI, which I don't think you're saying, Jonathan, at all. But for our folks that are in the audience, it's like, well, I got to go out and buy every AI tool and I'll be okay. Yes, embrace new technology, embrace innovation, 100%. But also know, there's also that human element that's still there that you have to have in place. Classic example, one of the biggest things, and we touched on this already, is public relations in cybersecurity. And AI, okay, could you put something in ChatGPT, and have them write a statement of what happened? Maybe, But it's really having that human element there to interact with people, because one of the hidden gotchas with these things is that when you do get hit, people are calling you, whether it's the news, whether it's your customers, whether it's your vendors. They want to know what's going on, and you have to have someone from a human perspective that could sit there and articulate to the people on the other side of the fence to say, hey, this is what happened, here's how we're mitigating things, here's when we're going to be up and running again, with that. So having that balance between AI and human element is of major importance as well. Oh, are you on mute? I think you're on mute. Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think Riche is on mute.
Okay. Okay.
That's all. I mean, we can move on. I guess talk about some
Yeah.
other stuff while he figures it out.
Yeah.
And another thing that I found interesting in this report, is where one of the biggest areas is coming from, right? So it says that 82% of breaches are involved in some type of cloud environment. Now, most, there's a few big companies that probably still have completely on-prem servers and can contain their data. Those are probably the ones who are the hosting companies, right? Like AWS and Microsoft. I'm sure there's some other big ones out there that can do it, but the thing that hits for me is definitely the small to mid-sized businesses, and maybe the ones that are starting to get a little big. Most companies have some type of element of their data in a cloud, whether it's completely in there, fully dependent on that shared security model that the CPSs have, or if it's maybe just having some of their data in there. But the fact that 82% has some type of element of the cloud, that's huge, especially for, we'll say, for these smaller mid-sized companies who they don't have space, they don't have the physical locations to maintain their stuff on-prem, that in a way they're kind of being forced into it, to using cloud. But to go into it knowing that, one, there is a risk, and two, you can't just rely solely on the cloud service provider to provide all the security, right? The cloud is one of the big areas that I actually work in, doing audits and assessments. That one thing I find is that some of these small businesses, they rely fully on that. They don't plan on anything. And it's one of those moments where we have to remind customers that there's the shared responsibility model, which means your hosting provider has some type of responsibility, but you as a customer also have responsibility of securing your data within that hosting area, right? They'll take care of all the networking, security aspects, all the infrastructure, the security for the infrastructure, right? But for the data, how you're going to put your information in there, those companies, they are responsible for doing it themselves. And it's one thing that sometimes these smaller businesses don't fully have that good idea, or don't understand. Maybe sometimes it's even a cost, right? You can get a cheaper instance where you don't really get all the features that you can get with like a business or enterprise one. And sometimes these smaller businesses have to go to that route for a while, just because of the cost of it. But to understand the risk and knowing that there is, that 82% of breaches occur in there. So pay attention to how you're, the type of data you're putting in there, and the type of mitigations that you can use, whether it's through the hosting company itself, being able to, defaultly use some of their stuff. Maybe, what's the cost benefit of maybe upping your plan to ensure that you can inherit some more of their security features.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another risk that that needs to be quantified, and I'll bring out a stat in a second. But companies that say, well, we're never going to use the cloud. We're on prem. We have an AS400. We have servers, and it's all racked and stacked, and it's okay. It then brings up an interesting third party risk discussion, because then you have to have the conversation to say, okay, what about your vendors and suppliers? Are they in the cloud? You can't control whether they're in the cloud or not, and so you've already kind of spawned out your level of risk. Because again, the example that I give is, people say, well, I never do online banking. I'll never do online banking. I'll never trust it. It's like, well, your banks are using online cloud services on the back end. So maybe maybe you're lulling yourself into a false sense of security because you're not on your phone or your laptop, doing banking, but they're using those services. And if those are impacted, you're indirectly impacted as well. The other stat that was in that it was interesting was 39% of these attacks are multi-cloud environments. And that's the other piece of it, of where when we talk about the cloud, sometimes we just say, okay, AWS, Azure, GCP, or whatever. But there are so many cloud services out there: Salesforce, Slack. I mean, it's just, we can go on and on for days of the cloud services that are on there, which I thought was an interesting stat, because those can traverse. There could be a incident in Slack that can bleed over to your AWS environment, or vice versa, or whatever. So I think it's especially small businesses that sometimes lack, understanding, and it's not their fault. It's a very confusing environment, but having them to understand that the cloud is not just one thing. It could be multiple things that you're working inside of, and to do a true assessment of your level of responsibility. And Jonathan, you took the words out of my mouth. It's a shared responsibility model. And people early on in the cloud, they were like, I was like, what's your cybersecurity strategy? It's like, oh, everything's sitting up in OneDrive. We're okay. And it's like, no, that's not it. You own the data. You're just in the house, of it. So, if it's a car garage, and you put your car in a garage and you leave your doors and windows unlocked, and somebody comes by and steals your radio, or takes the car out, yeah, the garage is responsible for basic responsibilities of security of the car. It's responsible for safe storage. But if you're responsible for the actual vehicle that's in there, and so it's using that kind of mentality to say, yeah, we're not mitigating risk. And if you think that you are, read your terms and conditions of your cloud contract, and you'll be shocked to see exactly the level of responsibility that you do have, in protecting data, whether it be internal or your customers.
All great data. I mean, information shared so far, guys. I mean, there's so many important elements to this, but one very important thing I'm actually getting from this report is, for I mean, security leaders within their organization, is that they now have a very, I would say, a very powerful resource to actually build a business case. As I mean, you guys have actually mentioned earlier, is the fact that this is not so much centered on the technology. The technology is, we have technology, we have resources, but is that alignment? I mean, looking at one of the highlights of this is the finance associated with data breach. They did not mention the technology that is associated with a data breach. It's always back to the business. What does it cost us if there is a data breach? So I think this is a very good report that all security, I mean, personnel within organization, I mean, your executive, your board of management, I mean, this is something that you, has that security practitioner, should actually take this report, look at those various important points, to bring these to their attention, to say, this is what is happening, these are the trends, this is the impact, this is the effect of not, I mean, taking the necessary action, implementing the necessary resources within your organization. These are the things that could actually or potentially affect our organization. So I think this is a great report in terms of the research that was done, the statistics that are provided. So, guys, what's your final word? We're actually down to, well, no minutes.
It's all risk based. It's all risk based. It's not putting a $1 million fence around a $10 horse and overspending. It's also not ignoring the fact that there has to be some time and money and sweat equity that goes into fixing. But it's best to know the risk before having to find out about it in crisis mode. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and I said the worst question you can ask during a data breach or a cyber incident is, "How did this happen?" And if you're asking that, it's compounded. So taking this data, doing a cost-based analysis, doing an organizational wide assessment of costs, if something were to happen, and getting ahead of that and not trying to figure it out in crisis mode is huge.
Yeah, I'd say that one of the closing thought I'd have is just this, as you said, Rashay, this is a great document to use for the security leaders to be able to go talk with their senior management and just express any type of concerns that they might have going on into their business, right? And being able to use this as a tool, hopefully not trying to scare senior management into it, but just help them understand, as you've all both said, this is a business risk, right? Is nothing that, hey, let's just take this report, throw it into just the filing cabinets for security, and for them to worry about. But bring it out, review it, just see what are the potential costs that a company might have if maybe they're kind of a little weak on some of those mitigation strategies that's talked about in here, and then to make a plan around that, right? Whether it if it's going and getting some tools, getting some training, revisiting, we didn't really touch on, one of the aspects of the incident response plans and teams, reviewing those and just ensure that, yep, we are well trained. Maybe we're doing the table talk exercises, or some other type of simulation exercises to ensure that the team actually knows what to do in the event of a incident, and identified one, and how to move forward with that. So I think that this report is great for just reassessing the current mitigation factors that companies have at the moment.
Totally in agreement. I mean, that those are definitely great points to end on, guys. I mean, that's the end of our weekly cybersecurity article review in 30 minutes. And I've actually placed a link to this article. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is an article that you will definitely want to uh, get your hand on in terms of doing your assessment of this article. So see you next week, same time, same place for another informative discussion. And very importantly, don't forget to share this with your network. See you guys. Have a great day.
All right,
Take
bye.
care.